Montana Territory, July 1873, the baby's cry was the only sound still alive in the barn as the sun bled out behind the hills. Eliza Kersey pressed the newborn girl to her chest, her dress torn, her lips split, and her mind running on fear more than thought. The straw under her was soaked with sweat and blood, and her body screamed with exhaustion, but all she could think was, "He is going to kill us both." The door slammed open. Her husband's boots stomped into the barn, his voice already raised. "It's a girl," he barked, holding a lantern high. "You gave me a girl?" Eliza didn't answer. She just curled around the baby, her arms shaking. "I told you," he growled, stepping closer. "I told you I needed a son." The blow came fast, fist to ribs. Eliza gasped, nearly dropped the baby. Another hit to her back, then her shoulder. The newborn wailed louder, but it only seemed to make him angrier. "You think you can just give me another mouth to feed? A useless girl." She didn't scream. She had learned not to. Just shielded her daughter with her body, teeth clenched, praying he would tire out, but he didn't. Not until the baby went quiet from crying too hard. That was when he finally spat at the ground and stormed off, muttering about whiskey. Eliza lay there until the barn went dark. Then she stood, slow and stiff, and walked out into the cold night with nothing but the baby in her arms. She didn't look back. 2 days later, she was still walking. Her shoes were ruined, her dress torn open at the side. The baby, named Beatrice, though she had told no one, slept against her chest, wrapped in a feed sack. Eliza's legs barely worked, and her lips were cracked from thirst. But she kept going. She didn't know where the trail led, only that it was west. Away, she collapsed by a creek near sundown, her knees giving out, her head spun. She tried to crawl to the water, but could not reach it. She held Beatrice close and whispered, "I am so sorry." That was when the hoofbeats came. A horse stopped nearby, then Boots stepped into the dirt beside her. "Ma'am," she thought it was a dream, but the voice was real, deep, steady, and kind. A man knelt beside her. He looked about 30, with a weather-worn face and steady gray-green eyes. His shirt was dusted with trail dirt, and his revolver was slung low at his hip. He had the look of someone who had seen hard years and come out the other side quieter for it. Eliza blinked up at him, too dry to speak. He looked down at the baby, then back at her. "You need help." She managed a nod. His name was Lawson Grady. He rode her and Beatrice to his ranch in the hills outside Alder Gulch. It was not much, just a 2-room cabin, a barn, and a stretch of land with cattle, but it smelled of fresh bread and pine wood. He set her gently on the bed, brought her water, then wrapped the baby in a clean cotton cloth from a drawer. "You got folks nearby?" he asked as he checked the baby's breathing. "No," Eliza said, voice hoarse. "Just her." He nodded. "You can stay here for now." Eliza stared at him. "Why?" He looked her in the eye. "Because I do not hit women. And no child deserves to die on the trail." She felt her throat tighten. She looked away, blinking fast. "Thank you." He just nodded again and pulled the quilt over her. Days passed. Eliza slept near 20 hours that first night. When she woke, Lawson had fed the baby goat's milk and hung her torn dress to dry. He had not asked questions. He had not tried to touch her. He just brought food, made sure she had water, and worked the land. She watched him from the porch as her strength returned. He moved slow and sure, never rushing, never raising his voice. He spoke to the horses like they were people. He carved a cradle for Beatrice out of pine, sanding the corners smooth. Eliza did not know what to make of him. One morning she tried to help with the washing, but her ribs still ached. She winced as she lifted the bucket. "Stop," Lawson said, reaching for it. "You are not ready. I cannot just sit here while you do everything." "You are not." She looked up at him, frustrated. "What am I doing then?" "You are healing," he said, his voice quiet. "That takes work too." She looked away, ashamed of the tears in her eyes. 3 weeks later, she was stronger. She cooked breakfast one morning before he came in from the barn. He paused when he saw the biscuits and eggs. "You did not have to do that," he said. "I wanted to." He sat across from her, rubbing the back of his neck. "Smells good." They ate in silence for a bit, the baby asleep on a blanket near the fire. "You always live alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Since the war ended." She looked at his hands, scarred, weathered. "You fight." Virginia came west after. Eliza looked at him for a long moment. "You ever think about having a family?" He paused, then looked at her. "I do now." She felt her chest flutter, but she looked away. The next time he touched her, it was not by accident. Beatrice had a fever that night. Eliza paced the room, near panic, whispering to her baby in between cool cloths. Lawson came in from the barn and found her crying softly. "She is burning up," she said. He came to her side, took the baby in his arms, and sat down. "She will be all right," he said. "Breathe." Eliza knelt beside him, her head resting against his arm. "I cannot lose her. She is all I have." He looked at her. "You are not alone anymore." She looked up at him. His eyes were steady, warm. Then he reached out and brushed the hair from her face. She froze. But she did not pull away. His hand lingered. Then he leaned in, slow and sure, and kissed her forehead. Her breath caught. "I should not," she whispered. "You did nothing wrong," he said. She closed her eyes. "I gave birth to a girl. And he nearly killed us for it." Lawson stood, still holding the baby, and said only, "Then let me call her mine." Eliza stared at him. "She is yours," she whispered. "She is not your burden. She is my family," he said. "Same as you." Her legs gave out and she sank to her knees. Lawson knelt too, and she buried her face against his chest. For the first time in weeks, she let herself cry, and he held them both. The morning after Beatrice's fever broke, Eliza stepped outside while the sun was still low, the air cool against her skin. The meadow beyond Lawson's cabin stretched wide and golden, dew clinging to the grass. Beatrice slept bundled in a basket near the hearth, her breath slow and even. Eliza stood barefoot on the porch, arms folded across her middle. She hadn't meant to watch him, but Lawson was already out by the fence line, mending a post with a quiet patience that didn't need words. His coat hung from a nearby rail, and the back of his shirt clung to his shoulders with sweat. He paused once, wiped his brow with the side of his wrist, then went back to work without glancing her way. She stepped off the porch, her feet sank into the earth, soft from last night's rain. She walked until she reached the edge of the pasture, stopping a few feet from him. "I want to learn," she said. Lawson straightened. The hammer hung loose in his grip. "Learn what?" "All of it. Fencing, feeding stock, what plants to pull, what to keep. I can't be a burden, not here." He set the hammer down and leaned his arms across the top rail, studying her without judgment. "You ever handle a calf?" "No." "You ever ride?" "I've sat a horse, never alone." He nodded once. "All right." Eliza blinked. "That's it. You said you want to learn." He picked up the hammer again. "Then we'll start with fence posts." The days shifted after that. She rose before dawn, tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, and followed him out to the fields. He didn't hover. He showed her once, then let her try. She dropped the auger the first time she tried to dig a hole and cursed under her breath. Lawson didn't laugh. "You're holding it too far down," he said, moving beside her. "One hand here, other higher." She adjusted. "Now push with your legs, not your back." By the third post, her palms had blistered. She didn't stop. That night, her hands trembled as she ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls. Lawson noticed but said nothing. He set the cradle closer to the fire and watched Beatrice sleep, a line of worry in his brow that hadn't been there before. "She cries less when you hold her," Eliza said, easing into the chair across from him. "She's got a quiet soul." "She didn't before." Lawson stirred the stew. "Babies feel what you feel. Maybe she's not scared anymore." Eliza looked down at her bowl, her throat tight. "She was born into hate," she said. Lawson set his spoon down. "Now she's growing in peace." They ate in silence after that, the only sound the pop of the fire and the wind against the shutters. Later, Eliza sat on the porch alone, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The stars were thick above the tree line, and a wolf howled far off toward the high ridges. She didn't flinch. She only closed her eyes and listened. The door creaked behind her. Lawson stepped out, a second blanket in hand. "You'll catch cold." She didn't answer, just shifted to make space beside her. He sat, draping the blanket over both their laps. "You ever think about leaving here?" she asked. He looked toward the hills. "I did, when I first came. Thought maybe I'd head south, find a river town. Start fresh. And why didn't you?" "There was no one waiting for me downriver." She turned her face toward him slowly. "You ever want to be a father?" "I want to be good at something that matters," he said. "If that's being a father, then yes." Eliza didn't speak for a long time. "Beatrice will have your eyes," she said finally. Lawson's head turned. "She's not my blood." She doesn't know that. He reached for her hand. Not sudden, but steady. His palm was rough and warm, and when she didn't pull away, he laced their fingers together. You don't have to say anything, he said, but I'd be proud to raise her with you. Eliza didn't cry. She'd done enough of that in a past life. Instead, she rested her head against his shoulder and whispered, "Then teach me everything. So I can build something that lasts." Lawson's hand tightened around hers. We already started. By the time September leaned into the valley, dusk came sooner and the wind picked up from the north, sharp with the scent of pine and distant snow. Eliza stood in the root cellar one afternoon, shelving jars of stewed apples she'd boiled and sealed herself. The glass still held warmth, and her arms ached pleasantly from the work. She heard Lawson's footsteps crunch past the cellar door. A moment later, he called down. "Got a letter?" She climbed the narrow stairs, wiping her hands on her apron. He stood near the porch, envelope in hand, eyes scanning the line of trees that edged their land. The letter was already opened, the paper slightly crumpled where his thumb had pressed. "From who?" she asked, stepping beside him. "My older brother, lives down near Red Lodge. Haven't heard from him in over 2 years." She leaned against the porch rail. "Is he all right?" Lawson folded the letter and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "He's dying." "Wants to see me." Eliza didn't speak at first. Her gaze followed the horizon where the sky had begun to bruise with twilight. A few birds wheeled high above the ridge, heading for roost. "When would you go?" "Soon," he said. "Ride'll take 3-4 days each way." She looked toward the cabin. "You'll need someone here for Beatrice. I was hoping you'd stay." Eliza turned to him, brows drawn. "I wouldn't leave her here alone." "I don't mean just while I'm gone." Something in her chest shifted. She watched his face carefully, but he wasn't watching hers. He was watching the sky, arms crossed, like he wasn't sure what would happen if he looked directly at her. "I mean to leave the land in both our names," he said. "When I get back." A breeze stirred the hem of her skirt. "You do that," he nodded once, "if you want it." "If you want to stay," she swallowed, her throat dry. "I didn't think I'd ever have a place again." "You do now." They stood in silence until Beatrice's cry rose faintly from inside the cabin. Eliza turned to go, but paused at the door. "Do you want me to write something?" "To your brother." Lawson rubbed the back of his neck. "Wouldn't know what to say. We haven't spoken right since before the war. Maybe it's not about the words." He gave a small nod, then walked off toward the barn. That night, Eliza watched over Beatrice's sleep with a letter pressed in her lap. She'd written it after the baby had drifted off, sitting by lamplight with her fingers smudged in ink. She had not asked Lawson what to say. She had written what she believed the man needed to hear, that his brother had made something good out here, that he was not alone, that there was still time to make peace. She left the letter on the saddlebag the next morning before he rode out. The days stretched quiet without him. Eliza kept the hearth warm and the chores steady. She stitched torn seams, mucked the barn herself, and learned to carry water without spilling. When the firewood stack ran low, she split logs with her teeth clenched against the cold. On the 4th day, a cow wandered too close to the line fence and got tangled in wire. Eliza found it at dusk, limping and panicked. She tied Beatrice to her chest with a shawl and used a hatchet to cut the wire loose. Her palms bled in the dark, but the cow got free. That night she boiled water with her sleeves rolled and her hands shaking. Beatrice nestled quietly in the cradle, watching her mother with wide, trusting eyes. "You're safe," Eliza whispered, "and I'll keep it that way." She didn't cry, not anymore. Lawson returned 6 days later, just after dawn, his horse dragging slow from the trail. Eliza was in the yard hanging clothes when she heard the hooves. She didn't run to him. She waited, standing with the damp linen clutched in her hands. He dismounted stiffly. His coat was dusted white at the shoulders from frost. "He's gone," he said. She stepped toward him. "Did he suffer?" "Not long." She reached for his hands. He let her take them. "I gave him the letter," he said. "He read it twice, cried the second time." Eliza looked up at him. "I'm glad," he breathed out slow. "I told him about you, about her." "And what did he say?" Lawson's voice roughened. "Said I finally found what I was fighting for." She laid her forehead against his chest. He smelled of sweat and horse and cold air. His arms came around her, slow but certain. They stood that way for a long time, until the sun crested over the ridge and the frost began to melt from the grass. Later, she handed him the ledger she'd started while he was gone. It showed how much flour they had left, how many jars she'd sealed, which fence posts needed replacing come spring. He flipped through the pages, then looked up. "You've been busy." "I figured if I'm going to be part of this place, I ought to know it," he nodded. "You do?" She didn't look away. "I'm ready, Lawson, to be here, to build what we talked about." He set the ledger down and took her hands again, careful of the bandages still wrapped around her palms. "Then let's build it together." Beatrice gurgled from the cradle, and Eliza turned toward the sound, her fingers still wrapped in his. She didn't need the words, not now. The promise was already made. The first snow came early that year. By mid-October, a pale frost coated the fields each morning, and the creek behind the barn had begun to crust thin with ice. Eliza woke before the light most days, easing out from beneath the quilt while Beatrice slept tucked close in her own cot near the hearth. There was always something to be done before the world stirred. Lawson had begun clearing the north slope, felling spruce and larch for a second outbuilding they'd decided to raise come spring. He worked steady, never hurried, but the stack of seasoned wood grew faster than expected. Eliza helped when she could, dragging kindling in a canvas sling across her back, her boots sinking into the softening ground. One afternoon, she sat mending a ripped jacket sleeve on the porch while Beatrice napped inside. The sun broke through the clouds in ribbons, catching on the curls of smoke that drifted from the chimney. Lawson came up the path from the woods, a brace of rabbits slung over one shoulder, his hat pulled low. His boots were caked with mud, one knee of his trousers torn where he'd slipped on the slope. "You limping?" she asked, setting the needle aside. "Only a little," he said, swinging the rabbits down near the chopping block. "Tree root jumped out at me." She stood and crossed the yard, taking his hand without asking. "Let me look." "It's nothing, you're walking like a man twice your age." He didn't argue after that. She led him inside and rolled up the trouser leg while he sat, wincing at the bruise blooming across his shin. "You'll live," she said, brushing dirt from the scrape. "I'd rather it be me than you." She glanced up. "You think I can't handle a bruise? I think I've got more use for a limp than you do, is all." She tied the cloth snug around his leg and sat back on her heels. "You always do that," she said. "Do what? Act like you're built for pain, like it's your job to take all of it." He looked at her, quieter now. "I spent a lot of years thinking it was." She reached up, her hand resting over his. "It doesn't have to be," he nodded, but didn't answer right away. The fire cracked behind them, and from the other room, Beatrice stirred once, then settled again. "Your mother," he said, voice low. "What was she like?" Eliza blinked. "Why? I want to know what kind of women you come from." She sat beside him. "She was stubborn. Grew barley in soil no one else would touch. People said she was cold, but she wasn't. She just didn't have time for softness." Lawson looked at her. "Sounds familiar." Eliza gave a half smile. "She died when I was 17. Fever took her in 4 days. He reached for her hand again, thumb brushing the inside of her wrist. "I think she'd be proud," he said. Eliza's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. "I think she'd like you." Lawson took a breath. "I want to ask you something." "And you don't have to give me anything you're not ready for." She waited. "When spring comes, I want to take you and Beatrice into town, not just for supplies. I want folks to know you're mine. Proper?" Eliza's eyes didn't move from his. "You mean to marry me?" "I do." She didn't answer right away. Just looked down at their hands, then toward the cradle where Beatrice now slept, a faint whimper rising as she turned in her sleep. Eliza stood and crossed the room, lifting the baby into her arms, rocking her slow until her cries faded. When she turned back, Lawson was still watching her, quiet, waiting. Eliza stepped closer. "I never thought I'd trust a man again. I know." She reached for his hand and placed Beatrice in the crook of his arm. The baby blinked once, then settled against him without protest. "But I trust you. And if you're offering us your name, then yes." "I'll take it." Lawson held Beatrice close with one arm and pulled Eliza in with the other, his hand resting at the small of her back. "You'll never have to run again," he said. I know, she whispered. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose shutter on the west wall. Inside, the fire burned steady, and Beatrice slept between them, her breath soft as falling ash. The wind off the mountains carried the first true bite of winter, and by mid-November the valley had settled into a hush. Snow came in slow, steady drifts, blanketing the pasture and softening the edges of every sound. The cabin stood firm against the cold, smoke rising in a thin ribbon from the chimney, windows aglow in the early dark. Eliza was stitching a new shirt for Lawson from the fabric she'd bartered for in Alder Gulch when he returned from checking the southern fence line. He shook snow from his coat and toed off his boots, setting the rifle just inside the door. Beatrice, not yet walking but quick with her hands, reached for him from her spot near the fire. "She's been crawling backwards all afternoon," Eliza said, looking up from the thread. "Keeps getting herself stuck under the bench." Lawson crouched to lift Beatrice into his arms. "She gets that from you?" "Oh," Eliza raised her brow, amused, determined, "goes where she wants even if it's the hard way." Eliza stood, brushing her hands on her apron, and crossed to him. "You're tracking Snow in." He didn't answer, just leaned in and kissed her temple, his beard cold from outside. She rested her forehead briefly against his shoulder before stepping back to take Beatrice. The child settled against her chest, warm and content. "Fence still holding?" she asked. "For now. Elk passed through again, might need a second line next season." They moved easily around each other as they always did now, Lawson peeling off layers, Eliza stirring the pot on the stove, Beatrice babbling softly between them, the quiet rhythm of shared life. Later that week they hitched the sleigh and rode into town, bundled in wool and flannel. It was the first time Eliza had returned to Alder Gulch since she'd fled through its edge months before. She kept her chin high, Beatrice pressed against her, Lawson's hand firm at the small of her back. They stopped first at the general store where Lawson signed for the flour and lamp oil. Then to the livery where he checked the harness while Eliza waited outside. A woman she didn't know passed by and paused. "Pretty child," she said, glancing down at Beatrice. "Thank you," Eliza replied, her voice steady. "Yours and his," Eliza said, nodding toward Lawson. The woman smiled faintly, then moved on. Lawson returned, brushing hay from his sleeves. "You all right?" "I am now," Eliza said. Afterward, they went to the small clapboard church where the preacher waited in his heavy coat, smiling through his gray beard. They married in silence but for the wind outside and the soft murmur of the preacher's words. No guests, no music. Just their breath in the cold air and Beatrice tucked close against Eliza's chest. Lawson held her hands in both of his, and when he said yes, he didn't look away. They signed their names in the old leather-bound registry, and when the preacher handed them the certificate, Lawson folded it and tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, light, like sifted flour. Lawson helped Eliza into the sleigh, then wrapped the thick wool around her and the baby. He didn't speak until they were halfway home, the forest rising up dark around them. "You ever think about building a second room?" he asked. Eliza looked at him. "For what?" "For a bed big enough we don't have to tuck our feet under each other's knees." She laughed, the sound full and easy. "What about a second cradle?" He glanced at her. "You thinking of that already?" "I'm thinking I've never known the kind of peace I've known beside you." Lawson reached across the bench, took her hand beneath the blanket. "Then let's build that room, let's fill it." That winter they lived inside the rhythm of the land. Snow stacked high against the barn, and the cattle huddled close in the lean-to. Inside, the fire never died, and Beatrice learned to stand clutching the edge of the table. She said her first word, "Ma," on a quiet evening while Eliza was kneading bread. Lawson was splitting kindling outside when he heard it. He came in holding his gloves and leaned against the doorframe, watching. "She said it plain," Eliza said without turning. "I heard." He crossed the room and kissed the back of her neck. "Spring's not far off," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "We'll plant again and raise that second frame." Eliza leaned into him. "And in years to come, we raise her, and any others we're blessed with, we keep the land. We keep each other." That night, rain tapped faintly against the roof, melting the edges of the snow. Beatrice slept tucked between them in the wide cot Lawson had built with his own hands, her fingers curled beneath her chin. Eliza lay with her head on his chest, his hand resting over hers. Outside, the thaw whispered through the trees, and inside, there was nothing left undone. No part of their past still chasing them. Only the warmth they'd made between them, the fire they kept alive, and the quiet promise of every morning to come.